in it before, so we'll give some folks a chance to join. We're gonna have a special guest, I hope.
Okay, I'm dialing in.
The special guest is Primavera de Filippi. I got a wonderful message from her over the Christmas holidays about a project that she's involved in, and I promise you I didn't know about this when I was talking about connecting with the Burning Man community at the retreat. I had no idea that Primavera would be doing something there. So, but are we at the top of the hour now?
Yeah, we can begin.
All right. Let's get rolling. I need to state really address the issue of the year-end transactions first off, just to make sure that there's no confusion there. First of all, apologies to anyone who wanted to schedule for the 27th. We've had to delay it by 1 day. So anyone who's been reaching out to me to schedule for the 27th, I can't do any transactions on the 27th. We're deferring. There was a point of order with respect to the board. So let me wind back, take a step back, and talk about this. When the board last met, we considered the Medora offer and a bunch of other offers that were coming, and we had to reject the Medora offer because of public statements made by the Medora principals, which would have made it impossible for the co-op not to have been exposed legally. So we had to reject that offer. There were other offers on the table, and what the board decided to do was to construct, and this will be reflected in the board minutes, was to construct a term sheet that had a weight average, and then to put that up for review for council and for the members. And so that's what I did. And then the members ran with that. And that's totally understandable. I felt that the board was very clear that they were essentially saying that we were making the same offer to all members. However, there's a point of order because the board didn't have a formal resolution and vote. Now, just to be super clear, I'm entirely within my authority as president to conduct the sale, to accept offers and do all of that. That's not an issue here. However, we want to be, completely transparent, and we want to have good harmony and accord with the board. So I spoke with Evan yesterday, and some of the other board members. And I also talked with Ed, and just what we agreed was that I would just make everything super clear on the Hangout today, and then what was going on, and then the board will have its formal vote about the year-end transaction tomorrow, and then under the optimistic assumption that goes forward, then we will begin conducting the transactions. So apologies for any confusion. It's just much better to be all clear about it. I should also say there's been some great engagement and feedback from the community around conducting this. From my point of view, I felt like this was like a runaway train. I felt, I'll really honest, I felt alone because most of the other board members were on vacation, and virtually no one could help me with handling the deluge of purchase requests that we got. So I've been fielding those all on my own, and that have come up with members on my own. So there's some pretty clear parameters that we should be cognizant of. As I mentioned in the Discord channel, and just so you know, it's me and not some hacker. Let me turn on the all right, here we are. That's me. You can see it's me. Um, uh, as I mentioned, the deluge in the Discord channel, we had a in order to handle the volume, we have to keep the minimum purchase request to 10,000. I just otherwise we'd just be overwhelmed. This is not intended to be a public sale. It's not intended to be a solicitation. We absolutely when the Medora offer came through, we had to the membership and the board all felt that the same kind of arrangement had to be available for all the membership. Otherwise, it didn't pass muster with respect to security laws and other kinds of concerns. So we put we put this together, and then we did not expect there to be such a huge response from the membership. The membership is overwhelmingly in support of this, except for a couple of people. One was Alexander Balkan, who has expressed some concerns about the sale, and he's a board member, so we will listen to those very, very carefully. Additionally, Rick S. on Discord voiced his concerns, and I've been talking with Rick and appreciated his engagement over this issue. With respect to this, what I want to say is that because the volume of the transactions is not, like draining down the Treasury, I don't see this as a major issue. But going forward, we have to have a different kind of governance process around any such transactions. We just can't have the membership just sort of wagging the co-op all over the place with respect to purchasing the Treasury. The co-op wants to get the Treasury out to the membership, and so that the membership is in control of the Treasury, and then there's a wider market around that for using the rev to run contracts. But it has to be done in this disciplined fashion. I felt like this was very much a runaway train, and didn't want to be dealing with this over the Christmas holidays. Anyway, so that's that. If there are any questions about this, let's definitely now's the time to ask me, and we'll do our level best to field all questions. If you're watching this later and I'm not online, then go ahead and post them to me in the Discord channel. So hopefully I've covered all the salient points. Any questions here from this group? Okay, silence is golden. I'm counting, going once, going twice.
I don't know if this is related, but I saw this petition about the RChain ventures. Is that a separate topic?
It's a separate topic, yeah, absolutely. Okay, all right. So moving on then, we have some fun stuff to talk about. I'm hoping that she joins us, but I got a wonderful letter from Primavera de Filippi, who has been active in the Ethereum community quite a bit. She mentioned to me that, I don't know if anyone has ever seen Primavera's plantoid project, but it's essentially a little, it's a sculpture that has some electronic parts, some music and lights that are a part of the installation, that's connected to the blockchain. And so if you read about it, she's done a really clever thing where there's a smart contract associated with the sculpture, and essentially the regeneration of the sculpture, the next design of the sculpture, is funded by the smart contract, right? And it's done in this very clever way, and I'm hoping that she'll describe that. She's planning on doing a Burning Man installation of Plantoid, and since RChain wants to connect with the Burning Man community, this seems like a really good thing for us to collaborate on. So she reached out to me to see if there might be some interest from the RChain side, and I said yes. We want to connect with the Burning Man community, and help burners get come in contact and connect with the RChain platform. So this feels like a really perfect opportunity. If she joins us today, she said she would, but it may be there may be some time zone stuff going on. But anyway, if she joins, she can talk a little bit more about the project. I think it'll be just fantastic for RChain to be involved with Burning Man. These are the this is the as I've mentioned before. If you read Stealing Fire, one of the analyses that they do is that the thought leadership of Silicon Valley is heavily influenced by Burning Man, and so this would be a near perfect way to engage the Burning Man community. It's an ideal vehicle for Burning Man, and if RChain can be a part of that, then that's it's like a match made in heaven. So I'm very, very happy to have this opportunity just spring up out of nowhere. I'm very excited. Okay, with respect to RChain Ventures, the board received the offer last week and has been reviewing it, and we have a vote tomorrow regarding RChain Ventures, but it doesn't have to be final, right? So if the community feels strongly one way or the other, because of the way RChain Ventures has structured things, if it's pushed off till next year, it doesn't work counter to the membership's resolution from the membership meeting in October. The way it's structured in terms of service agreement means that it ends up being a compensation-based exchange, and that fits within the framework that was laid out by the membership and council. So we don't have to have the sort of Russian pressure if there's a real desire to give any more review to this. I'm going to turn off my camera because I'm running out of battery. I just want to not have to walk in and find an outlet. But it's me, so you don't need to stare at my ugly mug. So there's another piece of development. So it looks like we have reached an accord with Pyrofex. The details of the deal are we finally got language around that and can post that. I think Nash did a great job of socializing the arrangement with the community just before Christmas, and now we have some firm language on the table. I can give you the rough outlines of the deal. So there are a couple of components to the deal. And Nash, please jump in and correct me if I get anything wrong.
Okay.
But essentially, what we're doing is we're giving them $2 million worth of liquid assets, and we will receive equity for that. And then, so I think it comes out to about 11% stake in the company. Is that right, Nash?
I think it's closer to 15%, but we won't have final numbers until later.
Oh, okay, cool. Closer to 15%. That's all right. And then the other side, we have structured a master services agreement where RChain is giving $5 million worth of rock to Pyrofex to develop the CryptoFex toolkit on the RChain platform. So from our point of view, this is not this is not work for hire. We're not owning this software product. We just want these stellar tools to run on top of RChain network, because if they do, then the people who are running those tools have to spend rev. And so it's like a razor and blade strategy. No, I'm not so cynical. No, it's just that it will bring much more business to RChain, which is why it's a great deal. And likewise, Pyrofex is giving us a certain percentage of their Spark token supply. Somewhere between 7 and 10%. I don't remember the exact numbers right now, but we can get those out to the community. And in exchange, we are locking in services with respect to the next 2 years of development, and we're locking in services with respect to the next 5 years of conferences. So already in advance of inking the deal, since Pyrofex and Nash and Meta and the team did such a great job with the developers retreat, they have said they'll step up and help out with the governance forum. So I've already put Patrick and the governance folks, alerted them to the potential of this extra and much needed help. But those are the rough for the governance forum. But those are the rough outlines of the deal. Nash, did I characterize it correctly?
Yep, I think you covered all the points.
Sweet. So if there are any questions about this deal, please ask away, fire away.
I actually have a question, Nash. We spoke yesterday, but my question is just very general. Will Pyrofex be still aggressively hiring? Obviously, you guys are also tasked with building the RChain blockchain. So how much will the development of this smart contract toolkit really coincide or interfere with the development of RChain itself?
Good question. So we've been running on a staffing plan for RChain for most of this year that has us about 65% of the way to fully staffing the dev team. We'll begin essentially hiring for the tools as a separate effort. As soon as this deal closes, we have added. In the last couple months, we've added a full-time staff here in our Provo office to help do sourcing and recruiting, and our resume flow has substantially increased as a result. So we're not actually anticipating that it'll impact the RChain recruiting in a negative way. Our plan all along, just so that folks understand the way that we've been thinking about it strategically. For the first 6 months or so, we focused primarily on working the networks of people that were closely related to the RChain project so that we could bring in extremely high quality candidates that were known to people in the community and that would be excellent community and technology fits. I think we've done that extremely well. You always want to continually hire from the direct network, but at some point you sort of run out of candidates that are, that are free, and you have to begin a broader search. And that's the phase that we've moved into now. We have, over the course of this year, Pyrofex has grown from 2 people to 20 as of next week. I think that by the middle of 2018, that we're going to be able to double again. And so I don't really think there's going to be a ton of competition between the 2 projects. We're really good at hiring. We've got an excellent process. I'm really proud of what we've been able to accomplish this year. And I look forward to being successful this way again in 2018.
Okay. It's my last question because I don't want to take up too much time on this, but how transparent will the Pyrofex be? Because certainly you guys do not have the same agreements. I mean, this is a private company you're running. I know that there's a certain level of transparency, but things like burn rate. I mean, Lisa in the co-op does pretty extraordinary stuff, just getting on here and sharing financial statements and balances with everybody on YouTube. Do we expect the same behavior, or do we expect a more just stealth, hard, fast charging movement from you guys, and not really getting caught up in transparency and emailing reports to everybody in the community? Is that something that, what do we expect from Pyrofex in that regard?
Right. So, our mission is I'm getting a little feedback there. We're a commercial concern, and so our core mission is to develop products that are profitable. We anticipate reporting. Part of our deal gives a board seat to our RChain co-op, so you guys will get reports via the board seat on a regular basis, and members of the board have asked that we provide reports to the RChain co-op's board on a fairly frequent basis. I think that we would prefer, and we're willing to talk about it, and I'd like to hear any concerns about this if from the community if there are any. But I think at least for the time being, we prefer to run as much in stealth mode as we can with respect to things like internal financials and the specific details of marketing and sales and that type of thing. Obviously, in the long run, there are different options and things can change if we were to go public and that sort of stuff. But for the moment, I think that it makes the most strategic sense for us to keep some of that information closer.
It all depends on the relationship and the way the agreement is crafted with the co-op. It depends on those details.
Yeah, but I mean, I think at this point, we have a very good working relationship. But both groups have benefited greatly from engaging each other, and we've built out a vibrant community together. So if there comes a time when there's a disclosure of information issue, I'm happy to wait until that time happens. At the end of the day, the co-op is going to have to live in a world where there are companies that it does business with that are not, public utilities, that are private commercial companies. And so we have to be able to have good relationships, effective working relationships with them. So we have to solve this problem. And what better way to begin to work out strategies than with, a company that with whom we have such a good working relationship. That's sort of baby steps towards being able to do this on a broader scale. Likewise, I think that there's already significant evidence from the Ethereum Foundation to RChain Co-op that we have that there are going to be a lot more of us. There are going to be a lot more of these kinds of organizations, right? And this has been a part of the larger software movement for quite some time, from Apache to Linux. There has been this growing understanding of information utilities as public utilities, and so there's already a very deep, wide open source culture that has infected, literally, in the case of GPL, all of the software industry. So there's going to be more of this way of doing business going forward, and I think it's great that Pyrofex wants to embrace doing business with organizations of that kind.
Speaking of open source, are there open source components to what Pyrofex will be developing?
Good question. So we we think that we can do a lot better by launching some of our components based on existing open source work, and we would carry those open source licenses forward, obviously. So yes, we expect a substantial portion of the toolkit to be open sourced, and we expect to stay committed to that. You know, I've been a Linux user since the mid '90s. Like, open source has given me a lot, and I certainly believe that it would be amazing for my company to be able to give back some of the value that I've received from the open source community. There will be, we would like to make profits at the end of the day, right? So we are focused primarily on making profits in places where it makes sense to charge for services that are difficult to provide at scale. In particular, one of the things that we want to do with CryptoFacts is develop an economy that allows there to be an exchange between software developers that are using the blockchain, integrating legacy applications with the blockchain, and the cloud infrastructure that runs that software for them, that helps to maintain the blockchain, runs their legacy APIs and things like that. So we expect to make the lion's share of our money in that way, by building infrastructure and maintaining it and operating it, as opposed to directly selling software licenses. And that way, we're hopeful that we can stay committed to releasing large portions of the stack as open source tools.
Thank you.
So I want to welcome Daniel. Daniel, what can you? We're always interested when new people come to the RChain hangout and come to the RChain community. Can you tell us what your interests are with respect to RChain and the blockchain?
Yeah. Okay. I just unmuted myself. Yeah. So I'm a finance major at Indiana in the business school there. And basically we had, I've been looking into cryptocurrencies for a while because I think it's an interesting area of finance. And I'll boil her up. All right. It's fair. But yeah, so we had a lecture on entrepreneurship class. And this guy's an entrepreneur, he's been part of a lot of ventures. And he basically talked to us about the emergence of cryptocurrencies and how, using blockchain technology could be a huge disruption in the field of currencies. Just the idea that you can, create a means of exchange instantaneously just by using computer networks. And, it turned me on to a whole new area. So I feel like just learning as much as possible about the future of currencies and which cryptocurrencies are good to invest in, and just getting into the field in any way because of just the massive growth that it could see. And I'm in my senior year, and I feel like that's just a good field to learn about because there's so much opportunity there. So I really want to just be like a sponge right now and just soak up everything I can and just learn everything about the business.
Cool. One of the things that I like about the blockchain is that it helps people remember that currency, what it was there for, what it was invented for, was as a means to help us take care of each other and the planet. And this, in other words, it's a coordinating technology. And once we have this digital representation, it helps us remember that. I think one of the things that I've been so delighted by is when I speak with folks of your generation who've had a few years under their belt in the blockchain space, and they just start designing these coordination mechanisms that use tokens as a part of the process, and it's second nature to them. And I feel that's just a fantastic development, because then we stop getting stuck in older ways of thinking about money that were really that sort of had fallen asleep to its original purpose, and why capital ends up being frozen in these sort of inequitable arrangements. So I'm very excited about the field as well. The other thing I would like to say to you, Daniel, is that where the blockchain is not just about currency. Effectively, with Ethereum and now with RChain, what it really is a giant global computer. And that global computer can't be taken down because it's decentralized. It's not running on any one group's machines. It's running all over the planet, and so it becomes a kind of public information utility. And the RChain experiment, so to speak, is really about making that public information utility be publicly owned and publicly operated. And taking that mission quite seriously. So like right now we're in the process of either looking to see if we can file or filing. I'm not sure where we are in the dividing line there, around a 501c12 status, which puts us squarely in a publicly owned and publicly operated utility. So we take the mission seriously on the regulatory side, but also in terms of how we approach the structure of the co-op. Because by its nature, blockchain has a great deal of utility in the public. So you can build all of the internet services that many people rely on, whether it's map and location services, or it's logistic and transport services. All of those services today are concentrated in the hands of a few companies. Likewise, social media and online identity, those are all concentrated in the hands of a few companies. And if those companies ever decided that it was in their best interest to shift policy or to change the nature of how business is conducted, they would be able to exert an enormous pressure on society. And we're already beginning to see that with sort of the concerns around how the US elections were manipulated using social media. So you could imagine that getting those services out of the hands of a few companies and into a public compute utility might shift the balance. And we're talking a very large balance shift, right? Imagine if Uber, the largest transport company right now, was not privately held, but was a public transportation utility that was run in a decentralized fashion. That's a game changer. That's a completely different world. And so I mentioned all these examples not necessarily because the co-op has policies or mission around all of these applications, but rather to open the dialogue to talk about that blockchain isn't just about finance. It isn't just about cryptocurrency. It actually changes the nature of the way we can utilize compute in our daily lives. All right. Well, I guess that was that really energized the conversation there.
Greg, if I might make a comment, that was actually excellent and probably one of the best articulated reasonings behind the blockchain and cryptocurrency in general. You know, as the platform gets built, you should definitely give a TED talk at some point. That was great.
That's kind of you. Let me just see. I sent Primavera the latest link. I haven't seen anything. I think I sent her the wrong link to get into the Hangout. So I think that was the reason why she didn't join. Let me. Okay, so I see that Greg Heiss is on, and I wanted to circle back to the ventures topic. And see if anyone had any questions for Greg, or if Greg, you wanted to talk about ventures at all in today's.
Yeah, you've got Greg Heiss is here. I think most of you might have seen the different information that we posted, so I tried to answer every question that I was getting through the community, but certainly continue to ask those questions. And Steve or David or I will certainly respond to anything that you might have. Happy to answer questions here if you got them now too.
All right, I'll jump in real quick. This is
There's a related thing that I wanted to mention. I think Ed can talk about this. That the milestones-based approach that Holdings has come back and said they want to look at that as a way of restructuring the deal with co-op. And Ed, did you want to say a little bit more about that? Are you still on?
Yeah, I'm still here. Hey, Greg. So, yeah, let me just give a little bit of history to RChain Holdings and Co-op and our relationship. We, formed both of those entities in December of 2016 for Co-op, and Holdings January of this year, and then and the whole structure was originally under the assumption that the primary funding for the co-op would come through Holdings, would be from traditional investors. And so we put together what started out as a letter of intent and then went into a pretty informal or briefly worded contract between Holdings and co-op to set up that structure so that we could continue the conversations with investors. As it turned out, of course, things played out a little bit differently. We found that investors and the general excitement was much more interested in tokens than equity coming in, and so that's what then set up for eventually the private sale. But anyway, that agreement was a deferred purchase agreement for ROCs. And the deliverables were largely around the progress of the platform, essentially a promise where the co-op would be delivering to Holdings. And then since then, the deal structure didn't make quite as much sense. So this has come up in a couple of contexts. But just from an agreement perspective, we know that that agreement could be tightened up in terms of its wording and so forth. So I asked Greg last week that we together explore what that would mean for a milestone-based agreements, where the milestones are deliverables both ways, from the platform to the Holdings, because our understanding of what's needed in the platform has evolved since roughly we created that in March or April. And as well from Holdings, what it will do for the platform and for the RChain community in general. So we're going to be talking through that and negotiating that in the coming month or so.
So thank you, Ed. So again, what I feel like is that the engagement from ventures and just in general, this reinvigoration of the way we think about getting businesses up on top of the RChain platform is already starting to have good positive effect. It's just as long as we continue to realize that virtually every business is going to certainly all of the major internet services are going to have potentially be disrupted. There's just no way that any one venture company is going to be able to handle the load. So having multiple of them in the space, I think, is a really good thing. And I think what we just heard from Ed is a direct consequence of the engagement from ventures and just thinking through the practicalities of what it's like to take on a project this big. I also want to say that I was really, it was a lot of tough work. I think Nash will concur. It was a lot of tough work to get to an agreement that sort of met all the parameters around the CryptoFX offering. And I expected it to be a lot simpler than it was. But when we looked at all of the regulatory compliance considerations, there was a lot more sophistication and nuance to the structure of the arrangement. And I'm really glad that we did that work. Because now we've got some experience under our belt, and we have a sense of which kinds of agreements are going to be able to work when we talk about fostering businesses like CryptoFX. And we at least have one workable model that we should be able to replicate and iterate across a number of different businesses. So I'm very, very excited about that. And it was a lot of hard work, but I think it's going to pay off. And I think this is kind of what we have to do with all of these efforts is get down into the details as quickly as possible, and really start crafting these arrangements. And speaking of which, I've been working quite closely now with the Resonate folks, and they have crafted a term sheet and a white paper to put before one of the appropriate funding bodies to help get them onto the RChain network. And this work of getting to the details and seeing what it's really going to take to realize the service on the one hand, and make sure that all the parties who have invested heavily, whether it's with software or with business development or with other kinds of assets, that they see some return for their efforts. And so the conversation has gotten really quite crisp. Involved in the conversation is George Howard, who was, if I understand correctly, one of the principals behind TuneCore. I don't know if any of you folks have released CDs out to the market. I have. I've got 3 CDs in the market now. And I use TuneCore as the principal means by which I distribute my musical offerings out to the internet and the wider market. And so I was very familiar with TuneCore and the way they operated and what their business model was. And so having George Howard jump in on this project was like a godsend. I mean, he's an honest-to-God lawyer with experience in the music industry who can confirm from up close and personal experience that trying to begin with digital music sharing is the wrong way around. And trying to begin with so touring and booking and what George calls other kinds of music adjacencies is a much savvier move, at least from his perspective. So that felt like to me, it was really, really awesome to have him engage. And then in addition, another partner has come into the Resonate work, and that's Jeff Thompson of Off Axis. And then Off Axis already has a working, profitable business doing a portion of the proposed Resonate white paper, in which they do gig swapping, and it's tokenized. They do credit-based gig swapping, but their credits are not blockchain based, which is really just fascinating to me. But it's working. It's working in the UK, and so they want to partner with us to effectively get their credits up on the blockchain. And the good choice for the blockchain is RChain. I'm hearing some buzz. Can everyone hear me? Okay.
Hear you fine.
Okay, cool. So as a part of the white paper and business plan, the Off Axis is going to propose a pilot project to first roll out the contemplated offering in a subsection of their market. So basically it's just tailor-made. They already have a market. We're literally just talking about upgrading their existing application to use RChain. So it's like, the path of least resistance yet again. So I'm very, very excited about this, because and then of course Resonate themselves. I mean, they have hundreds and hundreds of labels already signed up as a part of the Resonate co-op, and Resonate is a co-op. They've structured their business very much in the same way that RChain co-op has structured its business, our business. And so having another party in there that's sort of holding up the model of cooperative engagement as the way to do business. To me, this feels, again, it's like one of these magical, we couldn't have planned it better kinds of outcomes. So I feel really, really good about that engagement, and so much of it has to do with just being willing to say, what is it we're trying to do? What are the actual details that we have to get solved in order to get this done? And then rolling up our sleeves and piecing together, all that's necessary in order to get the service rolled out and to get it funded appropriately and to get it on top of, rolled out on top of RChain. So these are the kinds of efforts that we've been engaged in to make sure that we understand before Q1 2019 what it takes for a business to roll out on top of RChain, and to smooth that runway so that we can have business after business after business, offering after offering after offering, find their way, just make it like as easy as falling off a log to run themselves on top of the RChain platform. So so that's kind of an update on some of the work that we've been doing to make sure that there are businesses that can stand up by the time right after Mercury launches. We want to have businesses in each of the quarters of 2019 and 2020 launching offerings, doing ICOs, and just in general developing the ecosystem. So that's the aim, and in order to do that, we have to have done the legwork that makes it possible for businesses to do that with a kind of smooth, seamless experience. Any questions about the Resonate work or the Pyrofex work or holdings and ventures from that perspective of how what it takes in order to get a business up and on top of RChain?
Yeah, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I think the thing that's bugging a lot of people, at least from reading the Discord, is we're looking at 50 million rocks being distributed to the ventures and another 50 million if it all goes well. But what are they planning on doing with those rocks? That's 10% of the total supply. It's not a small sum.
Oh yeah, no, that's a great question. I think that Greg can answer that. Greg Heiss?
Hey, Greg, it's Steve. Greg is traveling today in New Mexico, so he may be in a bad spot. So maybe I can take a crack at answering the question. So essentially what the plan is for the rock is to incubate the company. Very little, if any, of those funds, those rocks, are going to be used to support the ventures ecosystem. The majority of those funds will be used to incubate companies that plan on building dApps to run on the RChain platform, which is, in our view, sort of the mission of Co-op, is to get those rock in the hands of the developers, allowing them to utilize that as a currency that they can use to help get their projects off the ground, support hire developers to build their dApps, and also in some cases, depending on how well they're already funded, hold on to those rocks to ultimately use as rev to support their projects once they're running on the RChain platform. So really, that's the mission of ventures, and I think it dovetails very nicely with the mission of Co-op. The reality is that you can build a beautiful train track, but if you don't have trains running on the track, it's nothing more than a beautiful train track. So our goal is to get the trains starting to be built and getting them ready to be put on the track to get going as soon as Mercury launches.
Thanks. That gives me a little bit of a better idea.
Yeah, the analogy here can go on in that railroads financed most of their development by taking orders for luxury cars that would eventually run on the tracks, having rich people basically fund the development of the tracks even. But in our case, we don't need the rich people because we have a treasury that we can use to buy those trains.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important is that RChain, the platform, doesn't want to be involved in the incubation of a bunch of companies. We want to offload that onto other groups like holdings and ventures to do the job. Because a lot of people will come forward with a good idea or a good team, or sometimes a combination of a good idea and a good team, or something across the spectrum. And RChain wants to be focused on developing the platform. That's our mission. We're developing the platform. If we spend too much of our time developing these businesses, then we're not developing the platform. So we really we need to offload that work to other groups who can act as not just the evaluation of particular ideas, but also coaching and mentors. Right? A lot of businesses will come forward and they have a great team, they have a good idea, but they still need coaching, they need mentoring, they need advice on how to operate in the blockchain space. They need advice on how to work with the Roland contracting language or with some of the other RChain technologies. And so offloading that into these other kinds of companies like ventures and holdings is going to help the community a lot, because it's basically division of labor, right?
That's really well said, Greg. Excuse me. And I'll give it to you from a holdings standpoint. There's really two entry points for us as we look for these companies. And I had a great meeting with Cora Networks this morning. We've already built out a lot of these. So it's the seed stage companies that are pre-funded that have, as you said, great ideas and may need some shaping and are willing to take rocks so that we can build them fresh on the RChain platform. What's even more exciting is that we've got other companies like Trusted Key, a few others, Cora, who've come to me because they see me speaking at events or through the marketing that we're doing and saying, we're ready to pivot as soon as we can start using Rolang and stand-up nodes, because we've seen the shortfalls in other platforms. So those are the two entry points for us to fund. So I think all the things that you said are well said. Us as educators, right, whether it's through speaking, architecture, and I'm glad we've got people in holdings who are actually building applications, that we can do that. And you'll hear more about this. I don't want to open up and say, hey, here's the deals we have on the table. But I try to share what I can, mostly in the dev hangouts, but I'll do more here. So thank you for that opening.
That's
Great.
awesome. Thank you. I think that was well said, both on your part, and also I really love the railroad analogy, Steve. That was a really good one as well. So we have just about 5 minutes, and I want to take a few minutes, unless there are any burning questions about ventures, Pyrofex, Resonate, or the governance forum, or any of the other stuff or the year-end transactions. Unless there are burning questions about those, I want to take 5 minutes and talk about some fun technical stuff.
So, Greg, just real quick, there's questions on the Discord about how those that are purchasing will go through the validation process to make sure they're sending to co-op controlled addresses, and that there's no no attacks going on during that sale process.
Yeah, so the reason why we designed the thank you, Ed, I appreciate that for bringing that to my attention. The reason why we designed the private sale the way we did was precisely because there have been so many man-in-the-middle attacks, and the recent hack on RChain was another example of people being seeing that there are really, really large dollar figures and other kinds of assets on the line, and trying to get at them in nefarious ways. So the same thing, same process going to be used here. You will see one of the co-op board members, so either Kenny or myself, or one of the other co-op board members like Navneet, who will be conducting the transactions. In the next day or two, I will publish the addresses to which the Ether or Bitcoin will flow. So those will be in the year-end transaction channel. They'll be in a channel that is marked as member only. So you'll only be able to access that channel to see those public addresses if your Discord ID has been marked as member, which means you've already gone through a KYC process and we've interviewed you. And then every member will be able to see all of the addresses that the co-op will use to receive Bitcoin or Ether in exchange for the ROC token. At the time, the member will supply, at the time that we're on the Zoom chat, so again, this is conducted over a Zoom chat, or we'll also accept Skype. But just a few of these kinds of things. It must be a camera-based app. So at the time that we conduct the transaction, it will go down exactly as in the private sale. So the member will be in front of the camera. I'm going to insist again, even though we've already KYC'd and verified your identity, that you have a photo ID available and that you can hold it up next to your face with the camera. So there's no way that someone is going to be able to do a kind of man-in-the-middle attack. At that time, during the Zoom interview, the purchaser will provide an address where we are sending the rocks. So this will be an Ethereum address where we are sending the rocks. And then the transaction will proceed exactly as it did in the private sale. The purchaser will remit either Bitcoin or Ether when we see, at least one confirmation that the transaction is going through. Then we will remit the rocks and make sure that both parties can see that transaction on the blockchain. At that point, the transaction will be effectively completed, and the Zoom interview can conclude. Based upon experience, it doesn't take more than about 10 or 15 minutes to get all this done. And it's a good way for us to connect and talk about, your planned or continuing or ongoing participation in the co-op, and ask us any questions about the direction of the co-op or what we're doing. So it ends up serving multiple purposes, as we discovered when we did it. So hopefully that covers most of the questions. Again, let me just summarize one more time. There will be a channel where the addresses are published on Discord. And these are the addresses at which the co-op is expecting either to receive Bitcoin or Ether for the rocks that we are remitting. If you're a member and you've submitted a purchase request, you'll be able to get into that Discord channel and see those addresses. If someone claims to be representing the co-op and is asking for you to send Bitcoin or Ether to an address that you can't verify is on the list of addresses in that channel, then we advise you to let us know as soon as possible and get off the conversation. Don't engage any further. But in the happy face version of this scenario, the co-op will say, please, the co-op board representative or leadership representative will provide an address. The purchaser will be able to verify that that address is on the list of addresses that the co-op is accepting funds at. And then the purchaser will remit the crypto tokens that they're using to purchase rocks with. And then once there's confirmation of that transaction, the co-op will remit the rocks to the purchaser. So I haven't talked about Wire, but in the case of Wire, it's a similar sort of process. Same, camera-based interview process, and then the Wire instructions will be given at that time. When the co-op is able to confirm that the wire transfer has been executed successfully, then the co-op will remit the rocks. So that's how the USD is done. Any questions about that process?
Greg, I appreciate you going over that carefully. And then your Discord handle is Lighterhouse. Lighterhouse,
yeah. So we met we met the Balrog, and so now I'm Lighterhouse.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Can you drop it into the chat?
Sure. It's Leiterhaus. I don't have.
It's done it already. Never mind.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So that's all that. So it's 10:04. If we have just a couple of minutes, I want to, let me just find my laptop and do a quick screen share. For those people who need to rock and roll, I totally get it. But I want to just throw out some really, really fun, cool stuff that I threw out on the Casper Hangout, and talk about why it's cool. And
can I give a real quick update on?
Oh yes, please do. Yes.
Okay.
Hold on. Before Tim, can I slide in and ask a question about the sale? Since there, is there a minimum?
A minimum what?
Is there a minimum purchase this time?
Oh,
I know that last
yeah.
time there was a minimum.
Yeah. So I put min and max in the channel, and I mentioned it at the top of the hour. But I'll just
my mistake. I'll just
no worries. No. I'll mention it again, because if you have this question, then 100 other people have this question. So the minimum is 10K. If we go below that, we're just, there's too much volume for us to handle. And the maximum is 3 mil. And these are arbitrary numbers. I mean, in the interest of radical transparency, these are arbitrary numbers. I have it really has to do with what we can handle and what we can safely verify is going to fit within regulatory compliance. So
sure. And I know that there was some news in the channel about a cutoff date, folks needing to email you before the 26th.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's
all right.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's all good questions. All right. I'm just bringing up
over to Tim.
Yeah, so just a real quick update about the development process. We created a bounty program for parts of the Rosette translation. And we just received our first pull request from someone, which is pretty cool. Also really high quality, which is nice. Just wanted to put that out.
Oh, thank you, Tim. Yes, I appreciate that. That to me, that's just like, that is the news we were looking for, right? If our aim is to be a publicly owned and publicly operated information utility, then this is having the community start issuing pull requests is it's just like this is our aim. This is what we're trying to get going. So I'm really happy about it. Okay, I'm gonna jump on to Zoom with hang on a second. There it is. So I'm switching devices. 1 second here. Okay, hopefully everyone can see me. I'm going to do a quick screen share and then just talk a little bit about, just briefly, I talked about this on the Casper Hangout. I'll just talk very, very briefly. I won't take up too much of people's time. If people need to go, I totally get it. So the motivation for this work has to do with future-proofing our offering in terms of the consensus algorithm. So if you start with a network, all of the nodes of which are running exactly the same, a consensus algorithm, over time, with software updates and soft forks and other kinds of things, you're going to end up with potentially with a network of nodes that have heterogeneous consensus algorithms. And then if you zoom out from just one network to the fact that there are already many, many existing networks, each of which are using a slightly different notion of consensus, then you clearly have a network of networks with heterogeneous consensus algorithms.
And what you'd like to be able to do is for some group of these networks to reason about end-to-end consensus, even though that consensus is built up of networks that are using different consensus algorithms. In order to do that, what you'd like is some way of saying when an algorithm actually is consensus, when it achieves consensus, and what. In other words, you'd like to provide an axiomatic characterization of what consensus is. And in some ways, Vlad is attempting this in his recent Casper reconstruction papers. So I've had on the table now a conjecture or a hypothesis that the traced, a partial trace in a traced monoidal category or partially traced monoidal category axiomatizes what we need from consensus. And so what I've been doing is going through a careful interpretation of sort of the minimal tools necessary to interpret that in the row calculus. And in particular, I've been doing a deep dive on Bob Kuka and Alex Kissinger's work, where they use the string diagrams of trace monoidal categories to. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I've been using the string diagrams of the trace monoidal categories, their presentation to give this interpretation and axiomatization. So hopefully that makes sense. So what we're saying is there's I conjecture that there's an already crisp axiomatic characterization that lines up with all of our desiderata for consensus algorithms. And now, in order to prove that, I have to make a construction where you can see the consensus part of this. And so what I'm doing is I'm constructing an interpretation of a diagrammatic representation of the axiomatization down into row calculus processes. So you can see the consensus in operation. And in order to do these, to have a faithful representation of these string diagrams, I was up against the wall because it became clear to me that there was essentially two notions of time. There was the time that had to do with the propagation of information, which you could think of as causal time. And there was time that related to interaction or events. And those two times were not the same. In particular, the latter time could flow backwards with respect to causation. And at first that was a little disorienting and confusing. And then I remembered the transactional interpretation of quantum mechanics. And so basically the flowing backwards in time has to do with the ability to do rollbacks for transactions. And we're familiar with this in the blockchain. That's why we talk about finality, because we know that certain transactions can be rolled back. We need to know when a transaction is final. So this kind of transactional interpretation that separates out the two kinds of time actually makes a lot of sense. And once I had that, then I could make a good case for an interpretation of the diagrams that actually lines up with the equational requirements of the diagrams. So I'll just give you just a real, very, very brief taste of this, and also a teaser. Back in 2005, I did some work with David Snyder interpreting knots
as pi calculus processes or row calculus processes. And the idea is very simple, that a crossing in a knot diagram can be represented as a kind of circuit where, you know, you have the, 4 different ports here, and the overarch of the crossing, let's say it's this one, is allowed. So if a signal shows up here, then without hesitation, it can run across and go here. Whereas the undercrossing has to synchronize and make sure that there's no overcrossing that needs to go beforehand. So it's like a traffic light, or it's like a yield sign, right? So that's a way to think about it. And it turns out that you can give a faithful interpretation of knots using this approach, so that the notion of equivalence of knots, the sort of topological equivalence of knots, corresponds to the computational equivalence of processes in a certain way. So that's a teaser for what's going on in these diagrams. Another way to think about these, if I take this and I rotate it this way, then we could think about this as a kind of channel between Alice and Bob. On the left-hand side, Alice is talking to Bob, and on the right-hand side, Bob is talking to Alice. And Alice, as a party, comes with a wire. And when she wants to set up a communication with another party, she lends them one end of the wire. And likewise, Bob lends Alice one end of the wire. And then Alice and Bob both use a discipline that's dual to each other. So when Alice wants to talk to Bob, she speaks on her wire, and Bob listens on the other end of her wire. And when Bob wants to talk to Alice, he speaks on one end of his wire. Alice listens on the other end of his wire. And so now they can both talk and listen using this twisted pair. Rotate it backwards, I can now add a time dimension to this. So if this is the information flow dimension, the vertical dimension is information flow, then the horizontal dimension, or the x-axis, typically is time. And now if I think about in the Kissinger and Kuka diagrams, input-output flows like this. So stuff comes in and flows out the top. So here is the normal flow of time. This arc is the normal flow of time. And so signal comes in, time passes, signal flows out. And that's what we think about. And then here we have the other side. But it runs the other way. So we observe this output, and that means that this input had to be of the same type as that, or the same value as that input. So time is flowing backwards here, and it's a strange way to think, but transactionally it makes sense. And so this is effectively a kind of pass-through. If we do no additional compute, signal coming in comes out, you can think of this as an identity. It's a wire between boxes. But now, here's the cool part. We can talk about wiring up output to output and input to input. These are the cup and cap constructions of the Kissinger and Kuka diagrams, the string diagrams. And those are important because what they do is they end up establishing relational constraints. We see this output and it must agree with this output. That's what this says. And here, this input only goes forward if it agrees with this input. So these are relational constraints on input and output. And now there are some cool requirements, diagrammatic requirements. So the requirements are that if you, the usual flow of time is like this. We input, and this input gets connected to this output. And so input to output should just be like a wire. But notice it's only one half of the wire. It's this half. And this one is the other way around. The output shows up having corresponded or correlated with this input down here. And so this is the other half of the wire. And the requirement in terms of the diagrams is that this equals this equals this. But if you notice, there's something funny going on, which is that this is only one half of the wire and this is the other half of the wire. So how could they be equal? If you read the Kuka and Kissinger book, you'll discover that they run into exactly the same issue when they when they go to interpret these diagrams as talking about quantum processes. And so the quantum processes, in order to have a faithful diagrammatic representation, have to give directions to the wires. And when you give the directions to the wires, then this splitting in terms of only one half or the other half is exactly what happens. And so now our diagrams and their corresponding row calculus interpretations verify exactly the requirements that are necessary. So now, finally, just to link this into consensus, the hint was that this cap and this cup are relational constraints. So here's the traditional view of a trace. You've got some function or process here. You've got some input that is connected to the outside world and some input-output relations that feed back into the process. So, and notice that we've constructed this feedback loop using cup and cap and a wire. So here's the cap and here's the cup. And the way to interpret this is just like a usual recursive program. Imagine that we had some kind of recursive sorting algorithm. So in comes an unsorted list, or in comes a list. If it's sorted, we pump it out, the output. We don't need to do any more work. If it's not sorted, we do some work somewhere in the middle here, and then we need to check and see if it's sorted again. So we pump it out, and then that goes around the loop, and we pump it back in, and now we check to see, is it sorted? If it is, it goes out. Otherwise, we do some work, and then we pump it around the loop. So that's one way to think about these diagrams, right? This trace is implementing a kind of recursion. And that's what's going on here over in this diagram, where we now use the recursion, sort of the caps and the cups, to implement composition where the two parties have to agree on overlapping state. So here's a node and client combination, and here's a node and client combination, right? So I've mashed them together into one system, and I've mashed these two into one system. And now what we're saying is that if the signal comes in and the compute on that signal doesn't require to know about a common namespace, then we can do our processing and push it out without having to mess about with consensus. If, on the other hand, the signal comes in and it requires handling transactions that cross into a namespace that's shared over here, then we pump it out here so that it comes in here and make sure that there's agreement on the common state part. And if there's no agreement on the common state part yet, then this party pumps it out, comes back here and says, okay, now do we have agreement? And around the loop they go, and this is the consensus algorithm. This is the passing back and forth of messages until they reach a finality condition that's acceptable for this transaction. And then the signal can go out here or out here. So that's that's the way in which we intuitively think about the traced composition as providing the consensus. And now we have the means by which to construct the trace. So before, that was the thing that I wasn't, in the proofs that I gave back in February, I wasn't yet constructing the trace. The step forward here is constructing the trace in terms of cup and cap, and what they do in terms of these relational constraints. So that's the progress that we've been making. And one last comment, I really appreciate everyone who stayed on this long. So one last comment, I talked about the practicalities of the practicalities of needing an axiomatic representation or presentation of consensus, and that was important for being able to reason about the networks of heterogeneous consensus algorithms. So that's clear and unequivocal. The networks will evolve, and over time, the nodes won't all necessarily have the same consensus algorithms, and you have to reason about end-to-end consistency there. That's a must-have in terms of the health of the network. But there's another piece of the puzzle that we haven't talked about. Several times in this talk, I've mentioned quantum mechanics. So what Kuka and Kissinger show is that their diagrams provide a rich language for reasoning about quantum compute. So in fact, their string diagrams line up exactly with an interpretation of quantum computational processes. Then they can reason about, for example, quantum teleportation and other kinds of quantum cryptographic things. So if we give a faithful interpretation of their language, then that allows us to map our consensus algorithms onto the quantum compute world. Now, this is important from the point of view of RChain as a publicly owned and publicly operated information utility. Why is that the case? The reason that's the case is because it's very soon, in the next 15 years, let's say, quantum compute is going to become much more of a reality. And with quantum compute, and in particular with quantum teleportation, consensus is going to fundamentally shift. How we compute consensus is going to change dramatically. With quantum teleportation, it becomes possible to do compute of consensus almost instantaneously. Now, I'm eliding a bunch of details here. That's kind of not what I'm talking about is big picture, broad strokes. If you have a network that's built out of nodes that can do lots and lots of quantum teleportation, then a Casper-based network just won't compete, just will not compete. Economically, it won't be competitive. So now let's look at the economic landscape. So Credit Suisse, if memory serves, has been running quantum cryptographic experiments for financial transactions for the last 8-9 years. So they're really ahead of the game here. Now let's imagine that in 15-20 years, they can roll out a blockchain network that uses a quantum-based consensus algorithm. At that point, they will outcompete everyone. And only the very, very, staunch diehards will remain on the networks that don't use quantum computing, which is a danger for this vision of a publicly owned, publicly operated blockchain. However, if we can future-proof RChain so that we are ready to take advantage of these kinds of consensus algorithms, then that means that the playing field is again level with respect to the natural market dynamics of these kinds of network capabilities. And what I'm trying to argue with these diagrams is that we're already sitting pretty, that we can give a very crisp characterization of what it means for, sort of to not to put too fine a point on it, but quantum enabled row-line contracts that utilize quantum compute to do the consensus part of the row-line contracts. That we are essentially setting up our infrastructure to be able to just easily and readily map onto that kind of computational infrastructure as it becomes more available. So that's just a part of the kind of work that we're doing here in RChain. And this is the kind of stuff that makes me excited. I get really happy when I get to see pretty diagrams that have nice proofs of their equational constraints. And I really appreciate people letting me share what this is, the work that's going on here, and why it's relevant to what we're doing. And I will be giving a more detailed talk about this. Christian, are you going to be able to record this?
Yeah, I should be able. Just make sure you send me a reminder. We're talking like on the 29th, you said, or?
The 29th at 8:30 in the morning.
8:30 a.m. Pacific.
Yeah. Awesome. So unless there are any questions, I will wish you a happy new year and see everyone in the new year.
I have a quick question.
Oh, sorry, Jim, go ahead first.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt again, but I guess my concept, which may be related, of quantum consensus, so to speak, is, the complex Hermitian conjugate cancels out, the measurement cancels out equal and opposite differences, and the measurement is a kind of consensus based on eliminating the differences that are equivalent.
Well, we have a similar intuition. Yeah, I mean, what the intuition that I was following for quite some time has been that at the time that you make a measurement, you're effectively you're coming to a consensus that of an observed distribution of resources. So yeah, there's a similar intuition there. Yeah. What were you saying, Renaud?
My only question was, things like SHA 256 and other, sort of algorithms that try to prevent brute forcing of keys, etc. How do you view that evolving in a quantum computing world? Like, do you agree with one side that says it's a two-sided weapon, so you just increase the bit count and that should solve it? Or do you think there are other specific things and specific to RChain outside of consensus algorithms that can prevent sort of point of entry attacks where brute force could be done?
Yeah, I think I want to argue that RChain has some very, very sophisticated cryptographic tools that we haven't really talked a lot about, that make us like embedded in the row calculus. It is an approach to cryptography that is significantly different. And so I don't think that we have to subscribe to the mutual assured destruction of keys architecture of just upping the bit count. I don't think that we have to live in that mad world. But that's a longer discussion. I'd love to have that discussion, but it's a I'm conscious that we're 34 minutes over. So but
yep,
let's
absolutely.
have that sometime. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. I was just curious.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. Absolutely. Okay, folks. Happy New Year. Well, so talk to you in the new one.
Yeah, happy New Year. Thanks a lot. That was great.
Later.
Later.